Hello and welcome back to Massalia Tales. In the previous episode, the historic empire of Persia was toppled in just a few turns thanks to a lightning offensive by Cretheus taking all of their regions. He then moved on to attack the remnants of the Hayastan Empire, teaming up with Epaphroditos to the north, who was also besieging them and putting pressure on them. In Western Europe, war came to an end as the Gallic Confederation were defeated at Alabu for the last time. The hordes of the Steppe came up towards Sarai, but Akhtar, a new general with an army filled with local troops, was ready to stop them. It was a micro-heavy battle with horse archers, and lancers all over the place, but eventually, suffering extreme casualties, we did manage to win. But towards the end of the episode, we suffered two massive losses. Both Bendis and Cretheus died of natural causes, losing our best generals and leaving a massive power vacuum that now needs to be resolved. A chance had arisen for new faces to step up and get fair time before the Timucoi. And with the death of Bendis coming promptly after the end of the wars in Gaul and Germania, it seemed to be closing a book on the wave of aggression that had brought Massalia plenty of new riches and new responsibilities. Tired of war, the new movement in both the Timucoi and the Council was to push for peace, to rule once again through trade, using their now near limitless resources to complete their domination of the world through the economy. It was an apt choice, for the signs that Massalia's military was no longer the dominant force in the world were everywhere, while in terms of manpower and money, their advantages were still distinct. Welcome back to Massalia Tales, and since we are going to be reshuffling our political setup with the death of Bendis and Cretheus, I thought now would be a good time to actually review what the political situation is and go through the current commanders we have available, and we'll introduce the new commanders coming in to replace our austere old generals. So you can see here we control about half the influence. We have a small chance of a civil war. I believe that's actually stuck at half, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, because you'll see as we go through that the Timucoi has a lot more gravitas than the Council does. Firstly, I have Heracleides, now the head of the Timucoi. He's very old at 73, and of course we know him, a very good general. Second to him is Eustochus. Pretty old, but not so much. He's philanthropic, more of a politician than a general, but he's been doing a good job leading forces to support Bendis. We're going to jump around and look at where all these generals are. Heracleides is currently on the way to Britannia, we'll see him in a moment, and here's Eustochus. He's coming down from Alabu, having just conquered it. We're going to put him in a position where he'll be basically just defending the eastern part of our territory. We don't have any enemies and no potential enemies really, so we're just going to see what happens. Next up, Eurysthenes, the third highest ranking Timucoi member, hasn't done anything in a long time because he's been leading the reserve back here in Iberia. So we've seen him before. He is a good and honest soldier, but right now not so important to the general progress of the campaign. Next up, Cleandros. He used to be assisting Cretheus in the east, but he came back to the west and has become basically the head of the city guard of Massalia. He's a dignified chap, and as the head of these guys, the shields of the city, he's just been gaining experience in governance, hasn't had any action. This army, our most powerful army, which I've been keeping in reserve just in case there was to be a war closer to home, so it's going to continue to sit there. He's also a dreaded commander, and we're going to boost up that reputation here, because that means anyone he faces will have reduced morale. So he's somehow building up a reputation as being a fierce general, probably just spreading that himself through politics, because of course not actually taking part in any military action, although he does have a bit of experience leading Cretheus' army while Cretheus was wounded in the Far East, as I mentioned, so he's not completely out of touch with the military side of things. So next up on the list, we've got Epaphroditos, who we also know already, the confident and pretty good sort of noble type. He's a product of incest, he's patriotic, he knows what he's doing. Overall, a pretty strong upper class member of our society, so he's going to continue to do good work. So far he's been successful in leading his Mesopotamian forces around the place, and we hope he can continue that. So he's actually before Cleandros there, I did that in the wrong order. Anyway, Herodotus, the next officer, he is a pretty unfortunate character. He's ugly and he has a horrible wife, and he also loves freedom, perhaps in the attempt to get away from that horrible wife, but he's not been up to too much. He's leading our fleet in the Persian Gulf, so the most recent thing he did was starve out the Persians here and cause their food shortage by just blockading their ports, which was quite handy for him. But yes, he has no real further purpose because there's nothing we can do with the fleet here, but I am going to keep it around around just in case we need it. We might sail up the Gulf eventually and attack Egypt with him, you never know, so might as well have him around. He actually needs to stay in that city to keep its public order, so he's going to sit right there. Next we've got Actor. We've also seen him before. He is the sneaky and frugal chap leading our forces in the northeast. Next, Apanius. He is a man of plenty. This is the guy who's replacing Cretheus. He has no military experience, it seems. I like to think he's the quartermaster of Cretheus' old force because he's plenty good with the resources, but he has no skills that will lead him to be a good general. He is, though, really gifted in terms of zeal. He has 12 zeal, meaning he's extremely good in personal combat. So that means him and his unit will fight very powerfully if they were to go into battle. So that potentially is going to help him out in becoming a better leader. He's going to have more survivability. So now moving on to the council. The leader of the council right now is Evios. He hasn't seen action in a while either. He is the leader of our Black Sea fleet, currently stationed here at Olba. So he's a pretty solid character. He's confident. He's got a lot of skills that make him good at leading fleets, and he's got a very powerful fleet under his command. So he's just waiting for something that he'll be needed for. Next is Pyrrhus. We've never seen this guy, but he's been under my service for a very long time. He's leading my Eastern Mediterranean fleet, a fleet I've never had to use. It's stationed here at Athens. You can see we've got this really powerful fleet with loads of upgrades, and Pyrrhus, a pretty decent general, level 4, all levels gained while doing governing actions, hasn't actually seen any action. But hopefully one day he'll manage to get something out of having that fleet under his command. We've got Acronius here. We've seen him in action. He is a pretty decent, really solid general who's been fighting with us in Western Europe. Of course, that means things are going to be calming down, so they won't have much more to do. Right now, he's doing the duty he had when I originally hired him, which was guarding the Alps. I was always worried that the Scordisci to the east might attack, and he led the shield bearers here for a long time, just guarding this point before he went to join the war. And now he's back there as the war comes to an end, so he's a pretty solid general to have defending the edge of our territory. Next up is Aeschylus. This is the guy who's leading our fleet out in the outer sea, I guess you'd call it, currently in the English Channel. So he's a clever but modest admiral. He hasn't had much action so far because he's not really been needed. His main duty was ferrying troops around, and now he just sits with this pretty weak fleet actually in Ischia, waiting to see if anything kicks off. He may need to go and take part in the war with the Iceni, given how aggressive they're being. And along the same lines, Heracleides, who's right here, is actually moving up to support the Heracleidai up there. Hopefully when combined up there they'll be able to hold off the Iceni if they were to attack. Anyway, next is Kronos. He is the leader of our Western Mediterranean fleet. He's an austere, slightly weird seeming individual who, like many, hasn't really seen action. He's just been leading reserve forces and has gained experience from governing. So here he is with the Vengeance of Atlantis. This is the fleet formerly led by our legendary Admiral Homer, but like our other fleets, hasn't really been required, so it's just sitting in case a major conflict is to break out. So here we have Atonus. This guy is the man who is leading the Heracleidai. He is driven by faith, as it seems, and is a pretty good soldier. So he is a sort of nice leader for Heracleides to have under his wing, supporting him in this campaign. He's not particularly apt or ambitious, but he's a good, faithful soldier who will fight beside Heracleides when the crunch happens up there and the Iceni attack, which it looks like they're building up to because they keep trying to do agent actions against our forces to weaken them, and they've built up those 4 armies up there, so I'm extremely suspicious of them anyway. We'll see if they actually do anything later on. So finally we've got Nauthius, the weakest member of the council. He's compassionate and sneaky, so sneaky in fact that he's actually managed to take command of Bendis's old forces. So interestingly, Bendis's army, the Claws of the Peak, is now controlled by the council and by one of the absolutely minor characters. I think the council probably tried to undermine the importance of this Claws of the Peak army by just putting it into a patrolling duty and giving it an inferior officer so that it won't be so inclined to be involved in conflicts that break out, to reduce its prestige. I thought the men might be a little angry at my appointment, but indeed it seems the years of war have soured their taste for politics. They simply do not care about the fate of the Timucoi. They'll get better pay and easier tasks under the council anyway, so they can hardly complain. We'll make them remember that democracy is the way in which a noble republic is sailed, and that as soldiers in that democracy, they will no longer be beholden to the crass whims of some egocentric would-be dictator. As long as we present the matter fairly and do not slander their previous master, I believe we can tame these Timucoi war dogs and make something rather respectable out of them. In the council's name, of course. Now, as the footage here plays to show me, just clearing up a few bits and bobs as I continue on with this turn, I want to discuss the end game for this series. I, like many, have been waiting for this so-called civil war to happen that the game keeps saying is happening, but I basically worked out that it's basically impossible for that to actually happen. It's because of the reason I mentioned earlier. The influence of the Timucoi is kind of bugged. It won't go above 51%, and I did some experiments, even sort of hacking the game. Unfortunately, I lost the footage of it because it's all messed up, but basically I hacked the save to turn the gravitas of all the Timucoi members up to the absolute maximum, and then just clicked and turn a few times to see what would happen, and nothing happened. It doesn't go above 51, and I believe in the range 45 to 55 civil war is actually impossible because the game has this way to prevent civil war, which is keeping the politics perfectly balanced, and so even though it isn't perfectly balanced, it's kind of bugged out to think that it is, meaning the civil war just never happens, and that's why it's just been threatening it for ages, but nothing ever actually occurs. Now, I believe it's probably related to the fact that technically when I started the campaign I was playing as the council, and you may remember a very long time back in the series there was a buggy sort of thing where I switched over to playing as the Timucoi as a result of the game being updated and Massalia being added as an actual playable faction, not just one unlocked by mods. And this is probably in some way related to that, so some aftermath of that bug is that the Timucoi can't properly gain influence because technically we're also playing as the council or something, so it just stays perfectly balanced the whole time. Don't really know how it works, but the consequence is that we can't have the endgame to the series be a civil war, which is a massive shame because that's really what I wanted to happen. Now, I can win the series whenever I want, because I have all the victory provinces but one. Egypt control the last part of the other one, so if I just ally to Egypt, which I can do, they like me a lot, they're also Hellenistic like me, then I will just win the campaign. So it's been like that for a long time actually, even back before Cretheus made his attack on Mesopotamia, back before this second series started. I could have won the campaign by just allying to Hayastan, because I had good relations with them back in the day, and they controlled my last victory province. So, right now, rather than end the campaign with a victory, I would rather end the campaign with a struggle or perhaps even decline of the empire. I think this would be much more interesting. So, I'm going to propose the following plan to create the end game for this series. Bringing up the diplomacy map here, we can see the layout of the various powers here, and most of them liking me, as shown by the bright green colour. So basically everywhere, all the powerful nations are really in favour of me. We've got Carthage here controlling a decent amount of territory. We've got the Illyrian Confederation controlling more territory on our border. We've got Egypt, of course, controlling massive amounts of territory all over the place, a very powerful empire. And there's also Sparta, who control quite a lot of territory and also seem to have colonies like we do in the east. So my plan for a potential endgame is a Massalian world war, where we engage in conflict with all of the other massive powers at once. The ultimate challenge, one that doesn't have to be won. If we lose the war, that's fine too, so I don't mind it being ridiculously hard by declaring war on all of these powers at once. And the rules are going to be that I have to call all of my allies into all the conflicts, so any allies that choose not to get involved will be detached. So that could add difficulty, or if they join, it could make it easier. We're just going to gamble on that. We've got various powers up here, like minor tribes, so I could just attack to gain more power before then, but I think I want this war to occur in the current state that they're in. So we have these client states that hate us. Maybe they'll turn against us when the war starts, I don't know. But we'll just have to see. Now, I could prepare for the war by putting troops on all the borders with these powers, but I'd rather it be a sort of sudden thing. So what I plan to do is basically come up with a random number of turns to just push ahead in peace, and then the war will just happen then in probably the next episode of Massalia Tales. So we'll probably see, or perhaps just like 1 year later, or maybe 5 years later, an enormous war started. I'll have to start the war because they won't declare war on me, though I'm probably going to be framing this as a war against Massalia rather than Massalia trying to conquer these guys. It's going to be a defensive war where the enemy have a big advantage, and I think this is going to provide some really interesting scenarios for what I hope will end up being the wind down and completion of the campaign, whether we seem to win the war or lose it. If you want to win control by money, then let me make a very simple suggestion. The control should be enforced by the physical coins themselves. I move that we declare all trade with the rest of the world may only be legally conducted if all exchanges are made using the Massalian drachma. All other coinages must be exchanged for ours here in the city before trade can commence. Since we have the most flourishing markets of all types of goods, our rivals will have no choice but to adopt our currency to avoid being locked out of the circles of prosperity. And since the supply of that currency may be dictated by we noble philosophers of the peak, then in effect, the fates of all people of the world will be in our hands to decide. So now finally, after all that meta and administration stuff, let's get back to the actual campaign action. Actor here is pushing on the Horde of the Steppe. We defeated their army last time, and now with his troops restored, we can try and advance to finish them off. The enemy have recruited some more units, as you can see, and they're also going to have their garrison, but I thought it might be worth a go. We can't see any of the enemy's units in their army, but we can guess that it's going to be horse archers of some kind, because that is their main type of unit. So as we go up, the balance bar actually really far in their favour, which wasn't what I was expecting, and looking at their army, I don't really think it's representative. You can see they've got a few horse archers there, far fewer than me, coming in as the reinforcements, and the garrison was a bunch of spears, armed townsfolk, which are just nothing to this army, and some foot archers, which might be able to do some damage, but of course we'll be able to micro around and use our lancers to try and take them out. So I thought that despite the balance bar, we'll go in and do this. It's much more possible than it looks, in my own opinion. The first move we're going to make is to just rush across this open battlefield, because we want to get the battle started before the enemy's reinforcements show up. Unfortunately, the enemy's reinforcements are all cavalry, so that's going to be extra hard, but we'll try anyway. So the enemy has their archers in front and their melee units behind, a two-line formation. Many of these guys actually had spears, despite their unit icon being a sword unit, so I didn't notice for the entire battle that they were a spear unit, unfortunately. Anyway, now when we get a bit closer, the enemy's archers are going to start opening up on our line. I think they have slightly higher range than me, so they will get the opening shots. Those wolves know there's time to get out of the way. Good move from them. So my guys now start firing back. It's going to be a skirmish where, although the enemy does have foot archers, I have so many horse archers that I'm willing to just sit at range and exchange blows of arrows, because I think this is going to be fine in the end for us. Of course, the enemy's reinforcements coming in are now going to muddy the waters. We're going to have to split units off to fight here. They've got enough horse archers to put pressure on the end of my line unless I put more and more units to turn out and face these guys. Luckily for me, the enemy are kind of bunched together, making it easier to hit them and probably blocking some of their own line of sight as well. So that's a small advantage I'm going to have. Now the enemy decide to advance with their melee troops, so here you can see them making this two-handed spear attack, which I of course just assumed was a sword attack and thought nothing of. Either way though, we're going to be skirmishing away from it right now, so it's not going to make a huge difference. And of course the archers showering arrows on these units without shields or armour, going to be able to do big damage to them. They won't last too long in a prolonged skirmish, so that's all fantastic. So we're trying our best here. You can see I formed a little arc of horse archers to engage this enemy blob of horse archers, and as I mentioned, I think that formation where the enemy is blocking themselves might mean we win out, even if the enemy's horse archers are better than ours, so we're going to let that little engagement continue. The enemy pushing forward with more and more melee units now, bringing up their actual spears to engage. Those guys almost skirmish in the wrong direction, as horse archers are wont to do, but they got out the way in the end, so we're just going to keep shifting the line backwards if they want to advance their melee units. That's all fine. There's their general advancing with his armed townsfolk, not a big threat, again just skirmishing away from him. Now I've got all my lancers together, my melee cab, and I'm going to do a nice charge right along the enemy's line of deployment. This is going to be very nice, both because it scatters the enemy and makes them move around to disrupt their attacks, and because the archers can't escape in time, so we'll be able to make contact with the foot archers and start taking them out. And you can see their morale's pretty low. They start routing right away. There are only garrison militia archers, so nothing special there. Some of the spear units chasing my men around, meaning my battles with the enemy's horse archers are being disrupted, because I'm trying to dodge the spears while also fighting with the horse archers, going to give the enemy a bit of a chance to deplete my numbers there at the cost of their spears. And actually you can see we're starting to actually get routes among our own troops, because the enemy's horse archers are actually better than mine. They're able to more rapidly and accurately fire, and here you can even see they've got these armoured horse archers, so we're going to be extra hard to kill, just pulling off cheeky trick shots, firing their bow in one direction, the arrow flies out in the other direction and hits my blob of men here. The blob issue actually affected my troops there. I need to pay more attention to that. The Lancers, having completed their charge, are now having a bit of trouble because, of course, they can't really make contact with any of the enemy's horse archer units, so they're just marauding around. I like to think they're distracting the enemy, but really they're just getting themselves killed, so I'm going to reprioritize them to try and find infantry to kill. Here you can see they're actually fighting with a spear unit, which is a bit dangerous, but it's just keeping the spear unit still so all these units can fire at it, although it wasn't having all that much effect. Over here you can see I'm engaging with what I thought was a mob sword unit, but it's actually a spear unit upon further inspection. When I play completely zoomed out, so I'm just looking at the unit icon and going, oh, a sword unit, right, charge into that. So actually we were struggling to kill them and we're losing horsemen as a result. This unit out here though is right where we want it to be. It's surrounded by horse archers, it's got no chance of catching up, so we're just going to slowly but surely pick off these troops with volley after volley of arrows. That's a fantastic situation out there on the flank. The other flank, much more messy with units just everywhere. Here you can even see spearmen coming in to engage with my cavalry while I wasn't paying attention. Luckily for me, these spearmen were very low in morale, so once they actually engage and take a few losses from the combat, they just leave. So that actually resolves that little combat right away. They're still being absolutely showered with arrows by these units over here. But at this point the balance bar starting to shift in my favour as we've taken out a few units, and now we're going to have some kind of numerical advantage so we can start hunting down those enemy horse archer units one by one. And the final sets of infantry, I just ploughed into them with all my cavalry, thinking they'd probably rout. You can see I was actually losing cavalry myself, routing there against those enemy armed townsfolk, just unable to bring them down since they were secretly spears. But in the end, the massive casualties the enemy were taking caused them to chain rout, although of course big casualties on our side as well, meaning it only ends in a close victory. But that was the decisive battle for the Horde of the Steppe. For the second time, we have destroyed that faction. We don't have to worry about them again. Why are they pushing this now? There aren't enough Massalian drachmas on the steppe to buy us sheep. We can't just switch to using them at the snap of our fingers. I don't suppose they sent a fleet to provide us with an initial reserve. Didn't think so. Probably only the Timucoi territories get the privilege of not being punished by their own rules. Well, we'll just have to ignore it. No one's going to fall for this trick. Just let the traders barter with whatever they wish. I'll have to return to the council to get to the bottom of this. I mean, this message can't just apply to us. Most of the trade goes through Egypt or Carthage. How would they ever agree to such measures? I think the Timucoi has lost the plot. Dangerously so. This could start a war. So let's have a look at the damage done by that battle. You know for sure that the Horde of the Steppe are going to be wiped out by this, so that's going to be a fantastic start no matter the result. Our army, pretty big damage, a lot of the units down to half strength, but really not going to be important in the long run because we shouldn't have to fight anytime soon with these guys. We can also spot the Daemons of Polymus coming back from their adventure off on the edge of the map, so hopefully they'll come in and start taking part in the campaign once again. So that is all good news. We're going to start converting this place over to help out with our control of the area. It's a pretty secure area. The only real possible threat is Karashmi here to the east. They're another faction focusing on horse archers, just like the Horde of the Steppe. They're at war with the Horde of the Steppe, which is handy for us to start with, but they really hate us, so there's a possibility that they will attempt to come and take this territory back once again. They refuse any chance for non-aggression there. So we'll have to see what happens with those guys. Now as we move on, Bactria offered me a military alliance. I have to pay for it, but it might be worth it because Bactria control a decent amount of territory here in the east actually. They've been growing quite a lot with the fall of Hayastan, so it would be nice to have them on side. They really want me to pay for it, but I decided to do it since it's not all that much money compared to the size of my treasury, and having Bactria on our side is going to help out with our security in the east because they are a Hellenistic city-state style faction just like us. Now the Horde of the Steppe decide to make a suicide attack to try and regain their territory. They're not 100% sure what they planned to achieve there because victory was impossible, but it apparently did not have the ability to make that calculation in advance. So they are wiped out, more damage to Actor's army, but again not going to be so important. We also see the survivors of the Gallic Confederation commit suicide against Cimbri. They actually survive and escape with their lives, but they're soon going to be wiped out. And there's the confirmation that the Horde of the Steppe are now totally gone. So I thought I'd just jump over to see what was happening over here, and I actually spotted the Karashmi army has for some reason come into our territory, possibly because it was hunting the Horde of the Steppe. But Arge Bosphorus have made a sudden attack against Kath, the Karashmi capital, so it looks like that potential threat is going to disappear pretty fast. That's very cheeky of Arge Bosphorus. They weren't at war with them last turn, so it's a very sudden hit. And Actor has become a little bit bloodthirsty, we learn there from his recent battle, so he'll probably want to see some more battles soon. Now we're going to jump over to Epaphroditos here, who is currently besieging this Hyostan city. Apenius is going to bring Cretis, his old army, up to support this attack, and when he arrives, the balance bar so far in our favour, I decide to just auto-resolve our way into the city. So Hyostan really low on power now. I think they have one other settlement. They control Bactria's capital, but apart from that, they're pretty much dead, and I am fairly sure they don't have any armies at this stage. So the garrison of this city totally wiped out. The damage to our army, pretty acceptable. Now I decided to actually liberate this place because it's in a province that I would not be able to take any more of. I decided not to try and have this awkward place to control and just create a military ally for myself to occupy it. So Aria, the faction, is created there to control that capital of the province of Aria quite appropriately, and we are now just going to fall back. So Hyostan have just Bactria, as I said, and I wanted to see if they would be my client state. They were willing to agree to that, but I actually didn't really want them to be, because they're at war with so many of my allies. I think it would be more solidarity for my allies for me to just stay out of it, not try and bring Hyostan under my wing. So what I do instead is make them pay money for peace, since we personally aren't going to pursue them any further, and now we will just ignore them and see if all of my various allies finish them off, because as we saw just there, Hyostan's at war with half the world right now. The Iceni are up to no good once again. Their agents are coming back to try and do actions against our forces here in Britannia. Previously their agent was actually wounded trying to attack Heracleides, but this time she comes in and succeeds. So we're going to need to try and take some revenge there. I've got my spy nearby to have a go, but unfortunately we only get an opportune failure when I try and manipulate the agent. Well, we'll just have to keep trying and hope that the enemy agent gets wounded if they do try and do any more actions against us. But still more evidence that the Iceni are planning something for us, so we're going to have to be careful. Now, I was doing some housekeeping, looking around my provinces and playing with tax rates, and I noticed that really it made no difference to my income whether I taxed places or not, and it's because of this empire maintenance. It's basically the corruption mechanic. It's minus 110% right now, so half my places give me 0 in tax. Only when they have slaves providing a bonus to the tax rate is it possible to get it above 0 because of that greater than 100% penalty I'm getting off empire maintenance. So just thought I'd point that out. That's why we have absolutely no money and far less income than we did when I actually started this second series of Massalia Tales. That mechanic's a very weird one. The Iceni have another go at trying to fool me with a non-aggression trick. It doesn't work, and again they immediately do agent actions against us. You can tell from this little pause in the end-turn sequence, so very annoying. So now at the start of the next turn we learn that Hyostan have been destroyed. We're going to jump over to look at that. It turns out that Bactria themselves went and finished them off, retaking their capital. So a nice poetic end to the mighty, once mighty Hyostan Empire. With their defeat it seems that peace is going to engulf the east, because everyone here is now allied together and working in tandem. The same thing in the west really, with the exception of the Iceni, but this age of peace is going to come to an end very soon, as I hinted earlier, and we'll see that in the next episode. The widely distributed Massalian territories were hugely profitable, but not for the Republic itself. As the Timokoi's tight grip on its domain loosened, power was increasingly passed to local rulers. These local rulers were, in most cases, not especially loyal or linked to the Massalian regime. As such, they tended to squander the revenues their lands gave them on personal projects, irrelevant to either the civic development of their peoples or the military forces provided by the Republic. The end result was that this huge empire was economically disempowered, despite controlling enormous volumes of trade and countless different peoples. To restore this control, the Timokoi was quickly being persuaded to adopt desperate measures.